It is midday on Monday, the 5th of September. A very good afternoon from Downing Street. And here we go again. The United Kingdom is expecting its fourth Prime Minister in the space of just 6 years. At around 12:30 today, just under half an hour, we'll find out who is to take over from Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party and then, of course, to be appointed as Prime Minister by the Queen tomorrow. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been campaigning all summer after Boris Johnson was forced to announce his resignation back in early July following repeated criticism of his conduct in government. Now, the decision on who the new Prime Minister will be is down to a relatively small group of 160,000 Conservative Party members. And Boris Johnson will formally offer his resignation to the Queen tomorrow.
Unfortunately, we have some technical issues with our link to Huw, but there is the picture of the door of number 10. Boris Johnson will be leaving it. Who will be walking into it as the new Prime Minister? We are half an hour or so away from that announcement of who the next Prime Minister will be. And as Huw mentioned, the fourth Prime Minister in 6 years. So the scene is set at the Queen Elizabeth II Centre, which is just around the corner from Downing Street, where, as you can see, there is a large press contingent gathered waiting for the announcement, and around the corner is where the announcement will be made. But we can see there all of those journalists lined up, the cameras trained on the door of number 10, and the MPs are all in the building not very far away, which is where Sir Graham Brady of the 1922 committee will be announcing the result of that vote. Well, whoever is our next Prime Minister is going to, of course, face a series of big challenges. So what are the biggest concerns? We've been asking voters in Birmingham in the West Midlands constituency of Northfield, which turned Conservative at the last election.
Everything's to do with the cost of living, isn't it? Everything's gone up, nothing's coming down.
Us pensioners, we're struggling. My bills have gone double now. My electric and gas from £90 to 130 to 250. It's disgraceful.
We keep talking, do we choose to eat or heat? That is the reality. We are going to struggle. And prices are ridiculous. My bills have gone up threefold. I'm a single person, one wage coming in. All the bills are going up. And it's still my wage that's got to pay all these bills.
At the moment, the concern is the economy. Everything is skyrocketing and people need to live lives and people have to cut down on essentials just to feed themselves and to stay afloat.
The economy and the prices of gas and electric and getting people out of poverty. I think that's the main thing to focus on right now.
Well, that's the views of some voters in Birmingham. Let's just see inside the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Centre, and that is where, as you can see, a very full room as they wait for that announcement from Sir Graham Brady as to who will be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Let's see who's going to step out of these cars, because we've been seeing all of the MPs arriving. This looks like it's going to be a senior figure about to step out of one of those cars and head into the building, but the entirety, presumably of all of the Conservative MPs, are in that building. They voted initially in the leadership contest, and then from a large field of contenders at the start, the numbers were whittled down to 2, and those 2 contenders, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, both went to the country for the vote, and that was basically the members of the Conservative Party, 160,000 of them. So as we continue to look inside the building there and the audience gathered and waiting, our correspondent Chris Mason is also in there. Chris, well, it's just not long to go now then until we find out.
That's right, about 25 minutes or so. In about 20 minutes, the two candidates backstage in private, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, will be told the result. And then at 12:30, we'll hear from the Conservative Party chairman, Andrew Stevenson, for a couple of minutes. And I'm told at 12:37, we'll hear from Sir Graham Brady. He is the chairman of the Conservative Backbench 1922 committee. You might remember him as the kind of returning officer in chief for the multiple rounds of elections when the party was whittling down the wannabes to just two back in July. He will take to the podium behind me and announce the result, and we will then hear from the winner, widely expected of course to be Liz Truss. I've just been having a mingle around in the room, and in the first couple of rows there is allocated seating, A4 pages printed out with names on the seats. Immediately to the left on this side of the centre gangway, a seat for Sir Graham Brady. Immediately to the right, Huw O'Leary and Liz Truss. Huw O'Leary is Liz Truss's husband, and to the right of that, Rishi Sunak as well. Senior figures beginning to arrive in the room, as you can see, and mingle around, plenty of whom are confronted by something of a question mark, a certain amount of jeopardy around their future careers. Will they feature in the new government of Liz Truss, which will take shape in the next couple of days? But never mind careers at Westminster, what really matters is what will that government do and how soon will they act on the big question of energy bills. And we do expect them to do something perhaps as soon as Thursday. Thursday is pencilled in for this big announcement on support on energy bills. It's promised to be big, that's their language. Let's wait to see what they actually do. They know that they have to do something significant given the turmoil that so many individuals and businesses are facing at the moment, confronted by ballooning bills.
And Chris, you just said the government of Liz Truss. I mean, all the expectations are that it is going to be Liz Truss. And as you say, there's been reporting on who's going to be in the team. But we still have to wait for that final confirmation, which is not long away.
We do have to wait for that final confirmation. Were it to be Rishi Sunak, there is that old cliche, isn't there, about egg on face. There would be skitfuls of the world's greatest omelette landing on my head and plenty of others amongst the press pack and within the political parties, because when you speak to the two camps, and by the way this has been the case for weeks and weeks and weeks, neither side were disputing that Liz Truss was going to win. There was an argument about the margin, and the margin will be crucial to look at. Is it as significant as some of those opinion polls? Quite hard to poll party members because there aren't that many of them and they're scattered thither and hither all across the UK. So the pollsters acknowledge that that is difficult, but such has been the margin in their polling, the lead that Liz Truss has had, that's where they and we get our confidence from, because even if they're a little bit wrong, the gap is still likely to be large enough that Liz Truss does emerge the winner. But you're absolutely right. Until we actually hear those numbers, we are still indulging in in a bit of speculation, even if it is, touch wood, well informed.
And just briefly, I mean, if it is Liz Truss, she was not the choice of MPs, was she? How difficult is that going to be for her to manage, along with all of the other challenges, very serious challenges about what happens going forward for the country with the cost of living? How hard will that be for her?
There's There's no doubt that that is difficult, without question, particularly when you compare the level of support, at least initially, that she had amongst her own colleagues here at Westminster, compared with predecessors, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, for instance. So there is a binding together process that needs to happen for the Conservatives, because the nature of a leadership race is that you fall out in public for months on end, and that's exactly what's happened. Now, I was just joking with a senior figure on their way in here, and I asked them that exact question. They said, look, we do this often enough, and we know what you have to do afterwards, and you will see, I suspect, a spectacular public outbreak in at least the first few days of support from Conservatives for Liz Truss, even if they weren't initially lured to her cause. But there's likely to be, and Team Truss acknowledge this, a small and in the end potentially quite vocal caucus who aren't particularly reconciled to the idea of her as Prime Minister and could start causing elements of agitation. There's another curved ball to think about, and that is Boris Johnson. Yes, he's leaving Downing Street, but precedent would suggest he's not going to vanish from public life, never to be seen again. He's not kind of that kind of character, is he? So what does he do? What does he say publicly? I think we can expect to hear him defend what he regards as the central aspects of his record, the relationship with President Zelensky in Ukraine. Expect him to have a phone call with the President this afternoon whilst he is still Prime Minister. Levelling up, a big thing at the centre of Boris Johnson's agenda, perhaps less significant to the incoming government. So we will hear from him, and you know, there have been Prime Ministers in the past who have been nervous about backseat drivers. He could be quite a backseat driver were he to choose to be. I suspect in the first instance he won't. I suspect when we hear from him tomorrow morning, he'll give a speech in Downing Street tomorrow morning before resigning as Prime Minister. He will also publicly emphasise, as he did in an article in the Daily Express over the weekend, that the party must come together. Easier said than done, though.
Thank you, Chris. Well, that's the politics. Let's look a bit more in detail now at the scale of the economic challenges for the new Prime Minister. Our economic editor, Faisal Islam, has been looking at the numbers.
This is the economic reality, the picture facing the new Prime Minister. Inflation at 10%, heading for 15%, perhaps 20%, 5, even 10 times target. The economy generally already falling and heading for a 1990-style recession, according to the Bank of England. And the core of it all, energy prices. Look at this, an average household's inflation-adjusted energy bill over the past few decades until now, and real questions about whether households can actually afford that line at the end. Whilst the war in Ukraine continues, there's little chance of energy prices falling significantly. So what can the next leader do? We're expecting some sort of significant effort to help people with bills with the help of public money or a system of repayment on bills over several years. As yet, there's no detail though. If Liz Truss wins, she says she'll help people keep more of their money by cutting taxes, like reversing this year's rise in national insurance and cancelling a planned £17 billion rise in taxes on corporate profits. But trying to do all this at the same time would require a lot more borrowing at a delicate time in the markets. It is, to sum up, an economically troubling time with an ominous decision over what to prioritise, the energy rescue or tax cuts, needing to be made within days and impacting every household in the country.
That's our economics editor, Faisal Islam, with the scale of the economic challenges for the new Prime Minister. We can talk now to Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who's at College Green, right by Parliament. It's all unfolding very close to where you are, Paul. We're quarter of an hour or so away from hearing who will be picking up the reins. And of course, what we've been hearing from Liz Truss has been about her agenda of tax cutting, and more over the time has come into the mix about what she would potentially do on support for people with those energy bills. What's your view of how affordable what she's been saying is?
Well, we're looking at, I think, an energy package which could easily hit £100 billion. I mean, that is a staggeringly large number. That's more than we spent on furlough through COVID. So the scale of the cost simply of helping households with their energy bills is going to be enormous. There's then going to be very big increases next year in spending on pensions and welfare because of high inflation, and big increases in spending on debt interest because debt interest rates are rising and because inflation is high. And Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, will have to find very substantial sums as well for our public services, schools and hospitals and so on, because they too are suffering from this increased inflation. In that context, it's a very difficult judgment as to whether there is money left to cut taxes or indeed not to increase them in the way that her government, the Conservative government, had proposed over the next 2 or 3 years. If you're also, as she seems to be, looking at £30+ billion worth of cuts in taxes, then the consequences both for the public finances and potentially for inflation could be quite significant.
Do you think there's any way at all that somebody could do both of those things?
Well, you clearly could decide to do that. The question then is what risk you are taking, and the more that you end up borrowing because you're spending more, a lot more, and taxing less, a lot less, the amount you're borrowing will go up a lot, and that creates risks for inflation. Probably means interest rates will go up faster than they otherwise and further than they otherwise would have done, and it also potentially takes some risks with the financial markets, who don't forget, have to buy all of that debt, all of that borrowing which is being created. And if the UK is doing this in a way that is different and more worrying to the markets than other countries, then they may find that it's more difficult or more expensive to sell that debt.
And at the same time, you mentioned inflation, 10.1%, and what we're seeing is increasing strike action and talk of more to come as workers demand pay rises to deal with that, because of course the cost of living is hitting people hard in the pocket.
And that's a particularly big issue in the public sector. We're looking at something like 5% pay increases across most of the public sector, teachers, nurses and so on, over the next year. That's in the face of inflation that's already at 10% and is likely to go quite a lot higher than that. That's a big real pay cut for all of those workers in the public sector who are, don't forget, the most unionised part of the economy. The private sector is not terribly highly unionised on the whole. And public sector pay has done even worse than that in the private sector over the last 10 or 15 years. The average teacher, the average nurse earns less today than they did back in 2010. So putting that level of pay cut, at least a 5% real pay cut on top of what's been happening over recent years, is clearly going to antagonise the unions in this sector of the economy, the public sector, where the unions do remain strong.
Thank you very much, Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Well, let's go back to Downing Street and my colleague Huw Edwards. Huw.
Joanna, many thanks once again, and apologies for a couple of little technical gremlins come to entertain us today. We're back in Downing Street, of course. This is where the new Prime Minister will be installed tomorrow, sometime tomorrow afternoon, having returned from Scotland, having seen the Queen to be appointed as Prime Minister, because the Queen is in residence at Balmoral Castle in Scotland at this time. Unusually, the Queen will not be returning to Buckingham Palace to welcome the new Prime Minister. Decisions have been made that the Queen will probably be more comfortable staying in Balmoral at this point rather than making that journey. But of course, the crucial fact is that by tomorrow afternoon, the new Prime Minister, we think is Liz Truss, will be in place here, and no doubt Vicki and I will be back here at that point to see what the new Prime Minister has to say. What kind of Prime Minister will she turn out to be? If it is her, what kind will she be?
I've been talking to lots of her friends, lots of people who've worked with her for years. I think the first thing to say is that she hasn't had the universal backing of her own MPs. There's not this outpouring of almost love that there was for Boris Johnson. She doesn't have that, definitely is the case. She has a philosophy. She has an ideology. She's very much a free marketeer, believes in low taxes. She's always been on that side of the argument. But her friends say she's a pragmatist. Now, I think you can look at her career. She has survived under 3 different prime ministers in the top jobs. Her career has been written off a lot of times, and yet she has stayed there around that cabinet table. So what her friends say is that she can bring a team together, that she's incredibly hardworking. That's come through from everybody, even those who are her critics. Now, are those who say that actually she almost likes to shock a little bit too much. She's a bit black and white, that she latches onto an idea and she won't let it go. Will she listen to other points of view? I think that's a question mark. But of course, she's coming in at a time when there is a huge issue, lots of huge issues facing the country. I think we can say that she will run a tighter ship, a more organised ship than we've had under Boris Johnson. That's definitely the case. But if you look at the Tory party as a whole, it is divided. It's just had this pretty brutal ousting of their current leader. She's got to bring them together. I think others would say, certainly Labour would say, it's a government that's out of ideas. Can she bring those ideas now into number 10? So there's an awful lot of a challenge there. She's got 2 years to do something about it, and I think it will not be dull. I think she will be wanting to come in and make decisions and make them very quickly. She's quite impatient, I think. Other people who've worked with her say she's not a big fan of civil servants. Anything that she sees getting in the way of the things that she wants to do is a problem. People have been in meetings with her where she's quite often rolling her eyes at what civil servants are saying. So it's all going to be pretty tricky for them, I think.
Well, the dynamics of that will be interesting, to say the least. Vicki, thanks very much. Let's bear with us because what's the time? 12 roughly. So we think we've got about 10, maybe 15 minutes before that announcement is made, but clearly we'll be right back at that QE2 Centre, Queen Elizabeth Centre, when it happens. Vicki there mentioned a couple of the ideas. If you're just joining us, let's just remind ourselves of the key issues that'll be in the new Prime Minister's in-tray from today, really. As we've been hearing, rising energy bills, and for millions of people up and down the UK, this is it. This is the big issue. Huge hikes, and the price cap set to hit over £3,500 in October, and predicted to rise above £5,300 in January. Very daunting and alarming for many people. And then, of course, inflation, currently at 10%, unthinkable a short while ago, but showing few signs of slowing down. And of course, the Bank of England expecting the economy to officially enter a recession in October. That'll bring its own problems. And then, of course, there's industrial relations, strikes taking place over pay and conditions across several industries, including key industries like the railways. So that's still unresolved. And that's before you get to the health service. The National Health Service commanding lots of attention, understandably, a big backlog of operations and treatments because of COVID, and the challenges of the approaching winter, which always brings additional pressures. And then, of course, you have social care. The huge problem of funding social care, certainly in England and Wales, not being tackled as it has been to a great extent in Scotland. And how will the new PM tackle the war in Ukraine? If we look at the international landscape, there'll be continued support for the government in Kyiv, and there'll be a continued close relationship, we're sure, with President Zelensky. If we look at the aftermath of Brexit, we still have a migrant situation in the English Channel. More than 25,000 migrants have made that crossing in small vessels, mostly this year. There's no end in sight to that. And then, of course, we have the big question about the future of the United Kingdom. Scottish Government determined to hold an independence referendum next year. They've asked the Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court, to decide on the legality of that. That's coming up in a few weeks. And in Northern Ireland, there is still no executive running matters. That's a long-running stalemate. And then following Brexit, of course, you have the issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's to do with trading in Northern Ireland, setting out trading arrangements. And that's another matter that has to be tackled. And Liz Truss has been criticised, as have some others, for suggesting that parts of that protocol might just have to be overridden or ditched altogether if, as they put it, the EU doesn't change its approach. The EU, of course, says, well, hang on a second, you signed this deal in good faith. Boris Johnson signed it. It was meant to be a deal that was signed, sealed and delivered. You can't change your minds about that now. It's an international treaty. But that's the kind of argument that is still going on. Let's go back to the Queen Elizabeth Centre. Two Conservative MPs kindly joining us. We have Mel Stride, who backed Mr Sunak, Chancellor, and we have Alex Shelbrooke, who is a supporter of Liz Truss. Thank you both for joining us. Mel, can I start with you and ask you, first of all, how you think this is going to pan out today?
Well, if you believe the bookies and the polls, then it's very likely that Liz Truss will emerge as the victor today and be our next Prime Minister. But, of course, we're not going to actually know the answer to that question until the announcement is made, so my fingers are crossed.
And Mel, what is your reflection on the campaign? Has it been a campaign that you think has been a good advert for the Conservative Party?
Well, personally, I think it probably went on too long. I think it could have been a shorter campaign. And of course, it was in two parts. There was the parliamentary stage in which Rishi topped the ballot, and then there was a membership stage, the results of which we're about to discover in a few moments. But I think it was an opportunity, at least, for the candidates to get out there, meet the membership, have the arguments, set out their stall for what they want to do if they are to be the next Prime Minister. But I think many of us, probably Alex included, will be pleased that we're now at least going to draw a line under the contest and get on with the business of governing now.
Well, I can see Alex nodding. How confident are you at this point, Alex?
Well, obviously, we've seen all the polls, we've seen the betting industry, and we've seen what members have been saying in our own respective parts of the world. So I think it would be an enormous upset if Liz wasn't to win, but we will find out in a few moments' time.
And what kind of Prime Minister will she be in terms of tone and style? Let's leave policy to one side. Tone and style, if indeed she does win today.
Well, of course, Liz has been Cabinet Minister longer than anybody in the Cabinet. She's been a Minister since 2012. There's a lot of people have seen Liz in action, and certainly in my role on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, the reaction she gets around the world as Foreign Secretary has been very positive. People find her someone they can talk to, somebody who listens, somebody who has very clear views about what needs to be done, but somebody who's very willing to listen to people and form what she believes to be the right approach at the right time.
In your view, Alex, what does she need to say if she does indeed win today? She has an opportunity to make a statement after the announcement by Graham Brady. What does she need to say? Because that message is not just for thousands of Conservative Party members. It's for millions of people watching, wondering who the new Prime Minister is and what she's likely to do. So how important is that initial message?
Well, I mean, I'm not a speechwriter, but I mean, ultimately, she is going to become the Prime Minister, and that means we are governing the country. And I've known Liz for over 20 years, and I know she absolutely is committed to the service of our country, the service of our constituents, and as you outlined, Huw, huge numbers of really massive issues in the inbox, and I think she'll make it crystal clear that she starts work straight away, and that she'll be working for the British people.
Mel, a final point to you, given that, of course, we'll have the lineup of a new cabinet before too long. Does that cabinet need to convey the message that she's trying to unite the party? She's trying to sound more conciliatory than she has done, for example, at times during the campaign?
Well, it's a very important point, Huw. What we've got to do now is unite as a party. I personally am very committed to doing that, whoever wins this contest. And I think that needs to be reflected both in the cabinet and also in the government more broadly. We need to have this as a meritocratic party in which all the talents are brought together. And I think if she does that, then she's got the very best chance of bringing us together as a parliamentary party. And let's face it, we've got an election in under 2 years now, and the real enemy here, who we've all got to focus on, is Keir Starmer, and heaven forbid some kind of hung parliament in which the SNP are involved. So people like Alex and I have got to get together now and fight that fight as a united party.
Mel, Alex, very good to talk to you both, and we'll see what happens in a few minutes. Thank you both very much. Well, two Conservative MPs there representing the two campaigns. That's the scene at the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Centre. It's just across the road from Westminster Abbey. It's right at the heart of Westminster, just a stone's throw from Downing Street, where I'm talking to you now. And of course, the world's media gathered there, along with members of the Conservative Party, along with ministers, cabinet ministers as currently stand. Lots of them, of course, will be changing jobs or maybe even losing jobs, and some of them will be appointed for the first time. Those backing Liz Truss especially, harbouring high hopes of high office in the days ahead. So we'll be back here at the Queen Elizabeth Centre for the announcement of the new leader of the Conservative Party and new Prime Minister very shortly. It'll be happening in just a few minutes' time. But before we look at that, it seems like a good moment over the next few minutes before that vote is announced to just reflect on the past 8 weeks since Boris Johnson was forced to stand down as Prime Minister after nearly 60 members of his government resigned because of his handling of matters and his conduct in government as they saw it. There have been 12 hustings meetings in this campaign, 5 television debates between the candidates, a lot of, well, let's just say energetic campaigning. It's not all been harmonious. That's the nature of campaigns. Let's take a look at how we got here.
I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
I can now announce the result of the ballot held this afternoon. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will be the candidates going forward to a final ballot of Conservative Party members.
Who will be our next Prime Minister?
Your proposals would mean that we get the short-term sugar rush.
Rishi,
not something that I want to cause for
you've just put in the highest
here.
tax rate for 70 years.
As she gets out the car, happy faces, big cheer, applause.
Your Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss.
Britain loves an underdog.
Thank you, Wendy.
Well, just a little flavour there, wasn't it? Just a few images, a few words as we went along, just to give you a sense of everything that's been packed into the past 8 weeks or so since Boris Johnson emerged here and announced that he was resigning. Lots of talk about him, of course, and whether he'd like to make a comeback in the months and years to come. Maybe we can reflect on that later on, but it seems a bit premature given that today we're talking about the election of his successor and, of course, the new Prime Minister. Timings, well, it's 12:30 now, isn't it? So I think we'll probably get to an announcement in about 5 minutes' time. Vicki Young is still with me, and Vicki, we'll just chat as we await this announcement. I think I'm right in saying that there is an address by one of the parliamentary colleagues of Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak before the announcement is made. That's a kind of party political pep talk. We're not proposing to take that, but we'll wait for Graham Brady himself to appear. Here's the Speaker and the party for the podium approaching the dais right now. But those are the images. You and I, Vicki, can talk first of all about the announcement when it comes and how important the margin will be. Because will people be right to be reading quite a lot into that margin in terms of what exactly the mandate that this new Prime Minister will have?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, don't forget this is the Conservative Party membership, of
Yes.
course, you know, a very small select group. They get to choose. We'll get our say at a general election probably in a couple of years' time. I think actually once the result is in, I'm not sure how much it matters. I think what is more important is her support amongst the parliamentary party. Remember, lots of her MPs have not, even now, come out publicly to back her. Now that's quite unusual. If the party goes against what the parliamentary party want, then that can cause quite a lot of difficulty. Now, some people will say Jeremy Corbyn, it happened to him. He had hardly any backing amongst his parliamentary party, but the membership loved him and went for him. And it can cause a lot of problems. She, of course, inherits a very healthy majority from Boris Johnson. So there shouldn't be too many problems in the parliamentary side, unless, of course, she tries to do things which they find very controversial. So I think that's the key thing here, bringing that divided party together. A party that's been in power for a very long time, been through incredibly difficult times. Look at the financial crash, go back to those days, and you had the coalition, and then, of course, now the energy crisis, COVID. It's been a torrid time. But I think even having said that, there are lots of people who feel that the party, the government, has somehow lost its way. What is it in power for? What's it going to do? It's that Liz Truss, and we assume it's going to be her in the next few minutes, wants to try and change. She wants to come in with clear ideas, she wants to make announcements quickly, and she wants to deliver. Things that all politicians say they want to do, of course they do, but she says that she can do it, and she wants a team around her that can do it. And I think the suggested makeup of the cabinet that we've had so far, and I haven't had many people say that what we've seen isn't the case, is very much her people. There's not that many people at the moment being named in those big roles who didn't back her. And some people think that's going to be a mistake, that she's not bringing in the likes of Rishi Sunak necessarily into a big role, or any of his supporters. Now, is that bringing the party together, or is that going to lead to further division? I think that is, another key issue about how this party and, of course, this government goes ahead and tries to tackle the problems that are coming.
As we look at these images, and again, this is the introductory speech at the session where they will shortly announce the result of the Conservative leadership election. We expect Graham Brady to be stepping up within the next few minutes to give us the result. As we look at these images, Vicki, there'll be people watching thinking, how in touch are these people? They've been immersed in this internal battle. The country's in a bit of a state. People are alarmed and terrified in some cases about rising bills, the state of the economy generally, if we're looking at a recession. And this party, according to critics, looks as if it's more obsessed with its internal politics. Do you think that's a fair criticism? Or, put it another way, how aware are they of that criticism?
I think they will be. I mean, of course, those who've been on the campaign trail have been immersed in all of that. But, they have constituents. They know what people are going through, and it's going to get worse. Now, it has felt self-indulgent. Of course, it has. The process is incredibly long. Lots of people in the party saying we've got to try and change this. I mean, it's particularly, of course, a major issue when you're in government. They've done this now several times whilst being in government. This is not an opposition party switching leaders every now and again because they can't get on. This is a party that's in government and now has the task of tackling these massive, huge problems affecting people's day-to-day lives and imminently. And lots of people, Tories as well as others, have said that there should have been more done earlier. Now, they will say, look, Nadeem Zahawi, for example, the man who's currently Chancellor but won't stay in that role, he's been working on things, that the civil servants, that the government machine has been working on things, and they have been discussing it. You know, Liz Truss's team, of course, is not going to be announced and then come into it. And here we are, we can see them now coming forward, the two candidates, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak.
So they're approaching, they're taking their seats in the front row there, surrounded by their own supporters, and of course we're in
Liz Truss's husband sitting next to her there.
To the right-hand side there, Liz Truss's husband, and we're just with Therese Coffey just sitting behind, and I can see Michael Fabricant behind her. So a good representation of ministers and backbenchers. And now Sir Graham Brady with the result of this Conservative leadership election of 2022.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. On the 7th of July, the Prime Minister announced his resignation as leader of our party. The 1922 committee then organised 5 ballots over an 8-day period, concluding the part of the leadership election for which we have responsibility, and putting forward the candidates to the National Convention and CCHQ for the programme of hustings all over the United Kingdom and the ballot of the membership that is now concluded. I work closely with the board of the party, CCHQ and Civica Electoral Services to ensure that all qualifying members had the opportunity to vote and to ensure that our ballot was secure as well as free and fair. I'd like to thank the 1922 executive, and in particular my fellow officers, Naz Ghani, Will Ragg, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, Bob Blackman and Gary Sambrook, and our staff for all of their help and support, especially during the administration of the parliamentary rounds of voting. I would like to thank the party board and staff for all their hard work organising the hustings, which allowed so many members to see the candidates in action, whether in person or online. I'm grateful to CES for the professionalism with which they have dealt with the ballot in distributing, collecting and counting the votes, both online and by post. Finally, I want to thank all the party members who have taken this responsibility very seriously, all the candidates who put themselves forward for election, and in particular my colleagues Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, who ran such excellent campaigns in the full glare of media scrutiny and who showed themselves to be outstanding candidates to be the leader of our party. Now the result. I, Sir Graham Brady, the returning officer for the Conservative and Unionist Party leadership election, declare that the total number of eligible voters was 172,437. The turnout in the election was 82.6%. The total number of votes rejected was 654. The total number of valid votes given to each candidate was as follows. Rishi Sunak, 60,399. Liz Truss, 81,326. Therefore, I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. We'll come up on stage.
Well, thank you, Sir Graham. It's an honour to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. I'd like to thank the 1922 committee, the party chairman and the Conservative Party for organising one of the longest job interviews in history. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank my family, my friends, my political colleagues, and all of those who helped on this campaign. I'm incredibly grateful for all of your support. I'd like to pay tribute to my fellow candidates, particularly Rishi Sunak. It's been a hard-fought campaign. I think we have shown the depth and breadth of talent in our Conservative Party. And I also want to thank our outgoing leader, my friend, Boris Johnson. Boris, you got Brexit done. You crushed Jeremy Corbyn. You rolled out the vaccine and you stood up to Vladimir Putin. You were admired from Kiev to Carlisle. Friends and colleagues, thank you for putting your faith in me to lead our great Conservative Party, the greatest political party on earth. I know that our beliefs resonate with the British people. Our beliefs in freedom, in the ability to control your own life, in low taxes, in personal responsibility. And I know that's why people voted for us in such numbers in 2019. And as your party leader, I intend to deliver what we promised those voters right across our great country. During this leadership campaign, I campaigned as a Conservative and I will govern as a Conservative. And my friends, we need to show that we will deliver over the next 2 years. I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply. And I will deliver on the National Health Service. But we all will deliver for our country. And I will make sure that we use all the fantastic talents of the Conservative Party, our brilliant members of Parliament and peers, our fantastic councillors, our MSs, our MSPs, all of our councillors and activists and members right across our country. Because, my friends, I know that we will deliver, we will deliver, and we will deliver. And we will deliver a great victory for the Conservative Party in 2024. Thank you. Thank you.
Liz Truss, who's just been elected as leader of the Conservative Party to succeed Boris Johnson, and tomorrow will become only the third female Prime Minister in British political history. She's going to be Prime Minister at the age of 47. She'll be the 15th Prime Minister of the Queen's long reign. So Liz Truss, having told them that she's campaigned as a Conservative and will govern as a Conservative, delights the Conservative MPs and party members who are gathered here at the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Centre, and sets out just a few thoughts on what her priorities will be. So the crowd will rapidly depart, and Vicki Young and I are looking at these images. First of all then, Vicki, as expected, elected with a majority of just around 21,000. Can we talk about the margin of victory first?
I think possibly it was closer than lots of people might have thought. I think it's 57% to 43%. I mean, Rishi Sunak's team was saying, look, it's closer than you think. They never thought they were winning in the later stages, but definitely a little bit closer. You know, of course, that makes it trickier for her. She hasn't had backing from an awful lot of her own MPs. Yes, she's won this. It's a clear victory, of course it is, but it's not the same as her predecessors managed to achieve. Now, that will be quickly forgotten. She will become Prime Minister tomorrow. In some ways, none of that matters. But the backing of her own MPs, the cabinet she decides to put together, is all about bringing the Conservative Party back together, trying to heal those divisions. And as she says, they're talking about delivery. You can tell that that's going to be her big message. She wants to come in here and, you know, I think in a less than subtle way, say to people, I am going to deliver on things. I'm going to get things done. Maybe her predecessor could be accused of not doing that.
Interesting. The tone was interesting. It was very assertive and it was very determined. And then secondly, of course, she did pick up one or two of the policy areas, including tax cuts. The strategy has been criticised by some economic experts and indeed by some of those backing Rishi Sunak as being an unwise course of action at this point in the economic cycle. She made a point, and Jacob Rees-Mogg there will be, of course, supporting this. She made a point of singling that out. So that doesn't sound like somebody who's going to be immensely conciliatory where it comes to the policies that she wants.
Yeah, and I think that is obviously an issue for people like Rishi Sunak. Now, it doesn't sound like he's going to have a job in the cabinet. It is difficult for a lot of those MPs who have very publicly come out and said this is a mad idea to start cutting taxes at the moment. People need help with their bills. Now, she has said she's going to do both. How do you pay for that? That's the big question, of course. But, you know, she's somebody who is on that wing of the party where they believe in giving people more of their own money rather than taking it and giving it back in what they would call complicated ways. But she's coming in at a time when people are clamouring for help after the COVID pandemic, the furlough scheme, which we thought would probably never be replicated. The idea that you pay millions of people to stay at home and not work, to keep businesses open. Now, it's not going to be necessarily on that scale, but we're still talking about potentially billions of pounds of public money. That goes really against her philosophy when it comes to the economy. But she says she's all about growing the economy. She wants to boost growth because in the end, she says, that helps everybody. She did mention that. You said she talks about personal responsibility, about low taxes. Now, look, I don't think anyone would ever accuse of her of being a brilliant public speaker. She's had some pretty woeful speeches in the past. She's not particularly comfortable doing it. She kept it very short there, didn't she? And I think getting on with it, I mean business, is going to be the kind of image she wants to project over the next few days. Interesting.
I'm just seeing some of the Conservative MPs and members leaving there, the centre. This centre, by the way, which is in the heart of Westminster, it's just across the road from Westminster Abbey. For those of you wondering where exactly it is, it's not too far from Downing Street where we are now, just a few minutes walk. When we were looking at the images just earlier, we're thinking about the third female Prime Minister in British political history. Lots of parallels have been drawn already with Margaret Thatcher, just in terms of image and in terms of determination. Not so many with Theresa May, but I suppose the thing that the three of them have got in common very clearly is the work ethic. Three of them clearly share that, and they are very hard workers.
Yeah, it is what everyone says about them, whether they are supporters or detractors. They do say that about them. And someone said to me, you know, that Liz Truss has been very much mocked for her Instagram, for her official photographer, for some of those images, you know, to what blouses she wore, standing on the tank, you know, the fur hat in Russia, all of those things which people said she was just aping and trying to channel Margaret Thatcher. Now, what someone did say was, regardless of all of that, yes, the similarity is much more that you're going to find Liz Truss going around Whitehall, popping up next to someone's desk and saying, what are you working on? What have you achieved? And what are you going to deliver? So that's where people say that there might be some similarities. Other people have said, look, she is nowhere near like Margaret Thatcher. But I think the other similarity is both written off, actually, at the beginning of their premierships. You know, no one thought Margaret Thatcher was going to be the person that took over the leadership of the Conservative Party. She came in and people were talking about her demise right at the beginning. And that is very similar. Liz Truss, the expectations are pretty low. There are people who say she's not been a particularly brilliant cabinet minister. She has survived under various prime ministers in turbulent times. Some would say that's because she is incredibly ambitious and she changed her mind on things like Brexit in order to stay in with the flow and the way that things were going. But, you know, she had a terrible time at Justice. That didn't work out at all. She is unproven in many ways. And she is coming in at a time when there are massive challenges for the country and people will be looking to her to deliver and to do that pretty rapidly.
Well, we'll have plenty of time during the course of the day to talk about the challenges, and as we were saying earlier, for those of you watching at home, we'll be back tomorrow certainly, because the new Prime Minister will be accepted by the Queen, will be invited to form a government by the Queen. That'll happen at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, the Queen's Scottish estate, and that's something that's already been arranged. Boris Johnson tomorrow will visit the Queen, tender his resignation, and then within a few minutes we'll see Liz Truss, now the new leader of the Conservative Party, being invited by the Queen to form a government, after which Liz Truss and the team will come back here to Downing Street, and we expect the new Prime Minister to make her first statement as Prime Minister in the street here, in line with tradition. Vicki and I will be here to see what she's got to say. And of course, one of those people keeping an eagle eye on all of this is the leader of the opposition, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who's taken some heart from the fact that Labour, in the opinion polls at least, has been doing rather better in recent months and has been making far more confident noises. Of course, now this changes a lot. The political landscape is now changing. Labour and the other parties will have to respond to that. Well, we've already had this statement from Sir Keir, who wanted to respond to the election of Liz Truss.
Well, we've heard far more from the latest Prime Minister about cuts to corporation tax over the summer than we have about the cost of living crisis, the single most important thing that's bearing down on so many millions of households. And that shows not only that she's out of touch, but that she's not on the side of working people. So she needs to deal with the cost of living crisis, she needs to deal with the fact the NHS is on its knees, and she needs to deal with the collapse of law and order. And there can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. There's a political consensus that that needs to happen. She needs to answer the question, how's she going to pay for that? Labour have been clear, it needs to be a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. So she needs to show that she actually understands and can meet the challenges that are there after 12 years of failure of this Tory government.
That was Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, the leader of the official opposition. Vicki is still with me here, Vicki Young, our deputy political editor. He went through a list there of things that he thinks are challenges. No surprises really, but he went straight for them. He's clearly very focused. We'll get a sense of that on Wednesday, won't we, when it's the first head-to-head between Sir Keir and the new Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right. It all happens very rapidly, doesn't it? So Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister tomorrow. She will appoint her cabinet. They are likely to meet on Wednesday morning, and then she has to face the leader of the opposition at Prime Minister's questions, of course, something that she hasn't done. And for opposition parties, you know, this is a challenge. It's a moving target, isn't it? You know, Boris Johnson, they thought they had the measure of him. The Liberal Democrats would certainly say they felt that Boris Johnson was handing them a pile of votes, particularly in lots of those by-elections that we heard about. And, you know, they now have to change their attack line, if you like. You know, a lot of them would have assumed that it might be Rishi Sunak who was going to be the next Prime Minister. Certainly Keir Starmer talked a lot, attacked the former Chancellor a lot, but it's actually going to be Liz Truss. So they'll be working out what they need to do, and they will be, of course, trawling through all the things that she's ever said. And I think her latching on to tax cuts is going to be the thing that they want to look at. They are looking for a lot of help for households and businesses when it comes to the energy crisis. And so that's why she, I think, wants to come out very, very quickly with what she's going to do. We know they've been working on it. She is not just starting now. She has been working on this for quite some time, and she will want to come forward with those announcements pretty rapidly.
Is it possible she'll want to share some of those before Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday so that she might have something to say rather than just be in defence?
Yeah, I mean, she would have to, I presume, go past her cabinet and talk about it with them first, but I would have thought she will want to come out and have something to say at that point. I mean, you know, it's a moment where I think we can expect, even those Tory MPs who didn't back her, that will be a moment when I think they will then, you know, look at who their real opponent is, and the real opponents are sitting opposite. So for a while at least, she will have them on side. How long it lasts, though, let's look at the recent history of the Tory party. They haven't been known to be that loyal to some of their leaders, and there are certainly people in the party who will be appalled that Liz Truss is now their leader and the Prime Minister.
You mentioned civil servants earlier, and of course we're here in Downing Street. The British Civil Service, respected around the world for the most part, and certainly the quality of people traditionally working in these offices, they'll be looking on with interest because, of course, she hasn't always been complimentary about some of the people working in the civil service, and yet they are now expected to deliver on what could be quite a controversial, radical package of measures. How is that chemistry going to work when they greet her, as they normally do, when she enters number 10 tomorrow afternoon?
Well, look, there's a certain amount of trepidation. They have been, of course, having talks. I think they feel that her team is pretty well organised, that there are ideas, they do know what they're doing, and they very much see that she is going to run a tighter ship than Boris Johnson did, but some would argue that wouldn't be too difficult. But over the years, I've known people who've sat in meetings with her. She's rolled her eyes at civil servants who've maybe challenged what she wants, maybe argued against what she wants. But her friends say, look, she is willing. Well, there's one. Now, let's face it, he's probably on the same page as her when it comes to all of that. He is tipped to stay. Potentially in cabinet. He very much on the ideological side agrees with her about all of that. But yeah, I think the civil service will have a tricky time with her. I think she wants them to deliver. She won't want to hear reasons why she can't do things. But in the end, they do have to work together. She has talked already, some of her team, about slimming down the number of people that work in these places. My experience is when they get into number 10, they don't want to slim down how many people are working for them. They actually want more people supporting them.
I think we've just got a couple of minutes before the end of this part of the broadcast, Vicki. Just a final thought for viewers who are joining us now, getting ready for BBC News at 1, which is coming up in just a few minutes' time, where, of course, we'll have a full recap of what's gone on this morning. Just in a few sentences, what's happened today in terms of the change in our political life? Not just the new Prime Minister, but potentially looking at a government taking a new direction.
Yeah, that's right. She has a strong philosophy. She is very much a tax cutter. She talked there in a very short speech. She talked about tax cuts. She talked about personal responsibility. She's very clearly coming from one direction, but she's coming in at a time when the demands are huge, and actually people will be looking as to whether she is a pragmatist. Her friends say that she is.
OK, Vicki, many thanks. Thanks for your company again today. Vicki Young, our Deputy Political Editor. BBC News at 1 coming up, and of course, coverage continues on BBC News. But for now, in Downing Street, thanks for watching and goodbye.
Rishi Sunak, 60,399. Liz Truss, 81,326. Therefore, I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
It's an honour to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. We need to show that we will deliver over the next 2 years. I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply. And we will deliver a great victory for the Conservative Party in 2024. Thank you. Thank you.